for our use, but it means that we're going to have to define the grid dimensions ourselves. So we can see here we've got guttering of 40 pixels for these smaller columns with widths of 260. So let's just define that here. Those are widths of 260, and they had guttering which we'll define with a margin of 40 pixels on the right hand side. Now these are going to float left, which means they're all going to tuck in beside each other on the screen. Now we've got very similar styling for our column, but we have different dimensions, of course, which I happen to know are 380 pixels of width with a margin of 50 on the right. So I'll save that, and I'm going to refresh our page in the browser. Now instantly what you can see are a couple of problems, apart from it looking horrendous. Firstly, you'll notice that our third column here, and that's the case with these larger columns as well, the last column in the collection is too wide to fit within the wrapping element, and that's because we've given them all this margin, whereas the third one in this case doesn't have space for that, so it's been squashed underneath them. So we're going to use our additional classes. In this case that was col3 for our last column, just to remove the margin. In the case of our larger column, the second column, I want to apply the margin actually to the left hand side instead of the right. So I'll just check that. And you can see now that they, regardless of the messing up of the clearing here, which we'll discuss in a second, you can see that they're positioned correctly. We have 3 columns, and then nicely underneath we have 2 columns, the correct widths, and in the correct positions. So what we need to be doing is clearing these floats, because the containing element, in this case with the 3 columns, it was this upper light area here. The containing element isn't able to actually contain them because they're breaching its boundaries. We need to add a third element underneath them, sorry, a fourth element in this case, which will then clear the floats and force the containing element to once again wrap things up. And I can demonstrate this by adding some markup here. If I add a div to the just after all the articles here, and I'm going to give it some inline styling here. I'm going to clear both on that. This is a common approach. You can see that if I just inspect the elements here using my element inspector, I'll find this div, and here it is, and you can see it there. It's filled the width of the page, the wrapper rather, and it's cleared those floats, forcing the containing element to once again hold everything within it. That's great, but it kind of goes against everything which we've said about separating our concerns. We've basically used a presentational, we've used a structural item for presentational purposes. This shouldn't really be in here. It doesn't have any semantic value whatsoever. So we'll get rid of it. What we're instead going to do is use the clearfix hack by generating an element using our CSS. Now we'll do that at the bottom here. This is quite a well documented and commonly used hack. Firstly, what I'm going to need to do is assign a class to all the elements, the containing elements, which I need to behave as containers. These are containers which contain floating elements which need clearing. So we're going to call that group, which I believe Jeffrey Zellman coined as a very semantic way of describing a grouped area of floats. So we'll use that class there. Now we're going to use a pseudo selector of after. And if you recall, earlier on we used the pseudo element before in order to add this element to our testimonials here. Now all we're doing is adding a clearing element after these group containers. And we do so in a similar way. We assign it some content, in this case nothing, but at least it brings it into the land of the living. And we're going to give it a display of block. So it's a block level element, and we're clearing both, just as we did with our div. Now in order to make it visible, I'm going to give it a height of 5 pixels and a background of black. So that will just illustrate to you what I've done, and you can see it there and there, serving its purpose perfectly, and the markup hasn't been touched at all, of course, so that's great. So if I get rid of the background color and the height, that will be entirely invisible. Now there are a couple of additional lines which you'll need in order to cater for some older browsers, naming no names. I'm going to suggest some further reading at the end of this video, and you can then go and read more about exactly what this does. But needless to say, this is a very solid way of clearing your uncontrollable floats. So that's looking pretty good. Now whilst we're here, I'm just going to improve these headers here, just so we can slap ourselves on the back and continue with what we're doing. I happen to know that the H3s are very similar to the H2s that we defined earlier on in the series. They have a font size of 28, and we're going to give them a line height of 40, which will keep them adhered to the baseline grid. I'm also going to add a margin at the bottom of 20 pixels, which once again keeps things along the baseline grid. So if I refresh the page, you can see those looking an awful lot better. One little problem I can see here is there's a random line which is cropped up. I'm not entirely sure what that is, so I'm going to just inspect that here. I can see it's got something to do with form, which according to my CSS here has an additional background, even though its containing element has a background, and that's because I can see I've assigned it a class of contact when the section that it's in is also a class of contact, and that's where this additional background's coming from. And this border at the top, it's that border at the top we can see. Yeah. So I need to just go and remove that class from the form. And here's our form. I just change that to contact form, and then we refresh the page. That's excellent. Now there are two more columns which need floating. Those are our address columns. I'm going to begin by changing this address because it's too big. Excuse me while I do this. There we go. That will just deal with that. That should be 3 lines now instead of 4. These are our addresses. Now I'm just going to grab these from the CSS I prepared earlier, just to speed things up. There are columns once again, so I'm going to add this little piece to the bottom of our column section. Much the same idea. They have a width, a margin, and they float to the left. And of course we've already applied our clear fix to the containing element here, so that shouldn't be a problem anymore. And there they are, perfectly neat. Okay, there's still some styling to be done. For example, the border around this image, I can do with adding some more spacing to the images here. But the purposes of this video are complete. We wanted to sort our columns out and discuss exactly what ClearFix, the ClearFix hack, does for us. So it's time now for some further reading. I'm going to jump back into our presentation here. I'd like to take a look at what Chris Coyer over on CSS Tricks has to say about the ClearFix hack. He also suggests that you head over to Nicholas Gallagher's blog for a look at his newer approach to clear fixing. Now before we jump into the next video, I'd like you to bring your HTML and CSS up to where we are now. Next time on 30 Days to Your First Website Design, we're going to continue our project and also look into browsers. I'm Ian Yates, and from all of us here at Tuts Plus, thanks for watching. Hi guys, welcome back to 30 Days to Your First Website Design, a Tuts Plus premium course. I'm Ian Yates and today we're going to talk about browsers. We'll begin as always by taking a quick look at what we're going to cover in this video. We'll firstly take a look at some browser examples, and then we're going to explore something called graceful degradation, then another something known as progressive enhancement, and after having discussed all that, we'll have a look at our own CSS in relation to various browsers. Lastly, as always, I'll give you some further reading plus an assignment. Now, as a web designer, you're aiming to have your work experienced by the global masses, and more often than not, via a web browser. There are several browsers around, and it's nothing to do with you which of these browsers are used to view your sites. So it's therefore advisable to bear each one in mind when building your projects. The most significant browsers are those you see here: Google Chrome, Mozilla Firefox, Opera, Internet Explorer, and Apple's Safari. And if we take a look at the figures provided by W3 Schools, if I just open up my browser here, drag that so you can actually see what I'm talking about, we can get a good idea of the proportion of internet activity which finds its way through each one. Now, implementing your own analytics will give you a more accurate picture of the browsers used to view your own sites. But we can see here that most web pages are viewed with Firefox, then Chrome, then Internet Explorer, and Safari and Opera, as you can see, hold a relatively small portion of the market. And we can explore these figures further and examine the proportion each version of each browser holds. Let's take a look at Internet Explorer, for example. And we can see that currently most Internet Explorer users have version 8 running. There we go. A smaller but growing number have version 9 installed, and some folk still have versions 7 and even 6 running. Now, why is this relevant? Well, unfortunately, browsers behave differently where your markup and styling is concerned. Some older versions may not understand the CSS rules you're using. Then again, they may well understand them, but deal with them differently to other browsers. This means that your design can look very different from one browser to the next. Now, there are a few approaches to dealing with this harsh reality. Firstly, you could ignore older browsers. Let's jump back into the presentation here for a second. And make sure your design works in more modern versions. Many people these days ignore Internet Explorer 6 as it's very outdated and can cause web designers a lot of costly extra work. The risk, of course, is that by shunning some browser users, you're alienating part of your audience. Secondly, you could employ what's known as graceful degradation. Build your designs so that they're optimized for modern browsers, making use of the latest web techniques, but ensuring that older browsers can still make perfectly good use of the site. Perhaps a user has images in their browser disabled. Now, adding a description of your image in the alt attribute will ensure that they at least know what should be there. Thirdly, there's the progressive enhancement approach, which is similar in ways to the graceful degradation which we just spoke about, but in this case a site is designed according to the capabilities of the lowest common denominator. Perhaps we would aim for a site to perform perfectly from IE7 onwards. We could then progressively enhance our design for more modern browsers, according to what they're capable of. We may, for example, apply CSS3 gradients to backgrounds for Chrome, in which in IE7 appear as flat colors. Users who have more modern browsers enjoy a richer experience. Lastly, we could work our socks off to make sure that our site appears and behaves as near to identically as possible in all browsers. Whichever option you favour is down to your own discretion. Now let's take a look at our own project. If I just get rid of this window here, we can take into account some of the theories we've just spoken about. So I'm going to open up Coda once again. If I remind us of what we needed to be doing here in Photoshop, we were about to approach the footer area of our design. Now these links here, our social links, they are particularly interesting in this current situation, as you'll see. So let's firstly continue with a little bit of styling. If we examine what it currently looks like in the browser, we'll see that there's significant styling missing in the footer. So if we go straight into our CSS and add a section at the bottom here called footer. We can start to add some styles. Now our footer itself could do with some padding because it looked a little bit cramped there, so we'll add 20 pixels to the top, slightly more at the bottom, and that should already significantly improve the spacing in our footer there. Okay, now I'm just going to copy and paste some of the styling for the copyright statement there. And there we have the copyright. It was a paragraph which I've given a font size of 12, a different colour, and I've floated it left. There were a couple of links in there whose colour I've also changed. Let's just take a quick look at that. And there you can see them there, floated to the left. Okay, so that's good. Now we really need to look at our links over here. So we're aiming now for the more capable browsers, and you'll see why in a second. I'm just going to punch in a couple of styles such as this. There we go. Now the social was that was our unordered list, and our list items are going to float right and have a little bit of a margin on each of them. So next all we need to do is cater for the anchors within those link items, list items, sorry. Now each one, according to our design, has a width of 40 pixels and also a height equal to that, and we'll need to display them as block level elements in order to get them to inherit that. We are going to remove the text by indenting it way beyond the boundaries of the element itself. So that's that. So let's take a quick look at what we've done there. And they have of course vanished to the naked eye. They are there, you can see the hover taking effect there, because we now need to cater for the background on each one. Now according to our markup, we had each list item with its own class to identify it there, a Skype, a Twitter and a Facebook. So we're going to add those now. If we go back and check our, sorry, where's Photoshop? Go back and check our sprite PSD, we'll see that we allowed a few options here. We're going to go for this third option here, the transparent background, and just stick this little transparent icon on each one. Now that means we're going to have to specify a background color as well, but that's no problem. So I'll just grab these and just quickly paste them in. And you can see here we have each list item and the anchor within it. We've assigned a background of the sprite ping, and we've positioned that according to where those icons are. We've also then determined that they will have our default green as a background color. So if we just take a look at that, you can see there they are. Now they need a hover state as well, which we'd already determined in our PSD, which was that lighter green. And you can see here I haven't changed the actual background image, I'm determining simply the color of the background. So if I refresh that, we now have a nice neat hover effect. Now in order to achieve the circle look, we're going to just add some border radius to this. So we go into our A element here, and you can see we've used the CSS3 border radius rule there, which is exactly 20 pixels, which will put a nice curve on each of the four corners of our link. And I've used here the WebKit and the Mozilla prefixes here, just for older versions of Chrome and Firefox and Safari. So if I just refresh that in my Chrome browser, you'll see that it perfectly makes the circles which we had built in our PSD. Now the advantage to using background colors there means that we're much more flexible with our colors themselves, but it also gives us a little bit more flexibility with modern effects such as transitions. Now I'm just going to demonstrate that using a WebKit transition because we're testing in Chrome here. So that's saved. I'm just transitioning the background change that we've defined in the color there. So if I refresh the page, you'll see that that hover effect now becomes much more subtle, and that will be very difficult to achieve with our sprite image if we'd relied purely on these images. Now that's because transitioning this background image from one to the other would result in a scrolling effect as we move between the two states. Now it does mean, however, that older browsers are kind of missing out on this, and if I just show you the result on the online version, if I open up Adobe Browser Lab, well, we'll discuss browser testing in further video. You can see I've taken a screenshot here. Now IE7 is struggling a little bit with our design at the moment. There are a couple of problems with it, but crucially our links remain square, which is a bit of a shame. Now this is an example, if you like, of graceful degradation. We've catered for the more modern browser. It looks exactly as we wanted it to, and they are present in older browsers. They look different, but at least the functionality remains present. We can still use these links exactly as we would in our modern browser. We just miss out on a little of the aesthetic pleasure that's brought to us by CSS3 rules here. So we really could do with, well, we need to make the decision. We can either leave it like this, or we can apply some kind of fallback in order to bring IE7 up to scratch. And if you recall our sprite sheet here, we did actually provide these images in order to use them, so we could use them right now. Now in order to take advantage, we don't want to add too much to our CSS file. We want to use all this modern stuff that we've put in our CSS file for the modern browsers. So we need to separate things a little bit, which means that we're going to go back into our index HTML, and we're going to add a conditional comment just underneath here, which basically says, and this is legible by Internet Explorer only, it says if this is less than Internet Explorer version 9, then I want you to load up this CSS file here. So this is ignored by all browsers other than those Internet Explorer 8, 7 and 6 and beyond even, but we're not going to worry too much about those. So now we need to make ourselves an extra CSS file which can be used in this event. So we'll save that. We'll then make a new file encoder here called IE.css, and now it's in this CSS file we're going to place some of our rules in order to improve the situation which we've just seen is experienced by IE7. So I'm going to quickly grab this and paste it in just to keep things moving quickly, and I'll begin the CSS file with another little declaration here of what's going on, so that's for our own personal reference. Now I have two sets of 3 rules here. We're basically stating that the background is in fact still the PNG, our sprite, but we've changed the coordinates for in order to place these 3 images here as our backgrounds. We've specified that it's transparent. The background color is going to be transparent because we've previously specified that the background color of our links would be this green color. So we need to remove that, otherwise we're still going to be presented with these square colors here. So we're looking at transparent links with the background of our circular buttons. We then also have a hover state for each of those, and that is of course dealing with these 3 images here. So if I save that, I'm going to publish all those files we've done so far to the net in order that we can actually just quickly test those in Browser Lab. So they're uploading as we speak. I'm taking a frustrating amount of time, Go on, off you go. There we go. Now I'll move back into Browser Lab and I'm going to refresh IE7, which should now be taking into account all of these additional rules here, like so. There we go, 100%. Okay. And there we go. Now, still some problems, as I've discussed. We'll have to deal with those in a later video, but crucially, you can see here it's making good use of our sprite and it is overruling the slightly nicer effects that we applied to more modern browsers. Okay, it's time for some further reading as usual. So let's just jump back into the presentation. I have two articles worth reading for you, both of which I've quoted in this video. The first is a classic from 2002 by Peter Paul Koch. He describes the concepts behind graceful degradation. Secondly, for great summary of the ideas behind progressive enhancement, try this article on Listerpart by Aaron Gustafsson. Now, before we jump into the next video, I'd like you to decide for yourself which approach makes most sense to your design. Remember to consider your audience. It's the users who you're catering for, after all. I'd also like you to take a look at our CSS and update what you've done if you're following along. Next time on 30 Days to Your First Website Design, we're going to move on to the next level in the standards model, behavior. We're going to get our slideshow up and running. I'm Ian Yates, and from all of us here at Tuts Plus, thanks for watching. Hi guys, welcome back to 30 Days to Your First Website Design, a Tuts Plus premium course. I'm Ian Yates, and today we're going to forget about theory for a bit and just concentrate on getting our slideshow up and running. We'll begin as always by taking a quick look at what we're going to cover in this video. Firstly, we're going to head on over to jquery.com and grab the all-important jQuery library. Then we're going to head over to Mike Alsop's site and grab his fantastic jQuery cycle plugin. Then we're going to come back to our own website and hook it up. Before we tackle the next video in the series, we'll look at some additional reading and then an assignment. Okay, so we may as well just dive straight into this. If I exit the presentation, you'll see I have jQuery.com waiting for me in the browser window here. And here you can grab the source code straight away from this nice big call to action button there. We can save that. Alternatively, we can go and check out some of their own CDN hosted versions. The advantage of using this being that we free up some of the HTTP requests that we'll be making from our website. If you remember back to me saying how you can get a bottleneck because of the amount of requests that can happen simultaneously. So by grabbing it from an external server, we can do that simultaneously while we're busy pulling all our own resources off our own web server. So we'll make a note of this location here. Then secondly, we're going to need to go and grab the jQuery cycle plugin from Mike Alsop's site. This is it. There are a ton of examples here. Mike's done all the hard work for us. We're going to be using an example such as on this intermediate page because we need this pager effect here. You can see this is a similar snippet to the one we'll be using. He has determined a target element where his pager links are going to be injected. So we're going to download that cycle plugin. It comes in light and full versions. The full version isn't particularly heavy anyway, so we're just going to grab that and pump it into our downloads folder there. And you can see that's already complete. Now we'll get rid of that for the time being and we will go back to our project. Here it is. Let's first of all grab cycle plugin. We'll put that directly into our JavaScript folder and then let's move to our index.html, and if we remind ourselves how that was looking by bringing up the browser, you can see that the styling for this upper area is all complete. This is going to be an example of a slide, and we have here these navigation links waiting to just be hooked up.